Live. We are live, Senator Clarkston. Good afternoon. This is Wednesday, February 22nd. This is the Government Operations Committee in the Vermont Senate. And we are going to start by continuing our discussion about sheriff reforms. But we do not have our witnesses here. We have one of them. Okay. Sheriff Anderson. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am sorry you're not here in person.
Regrettably, I could not make it today, but I hope to be there soon.
Do you have a job? Is that why you couldn't make it here today?
What do they tell me?
Okay. Well, last time you were here, you did not have a chance to finish, or we did not give you a chance to finish because it was late, and so we wanted to give you and Sheriff Marcoux the chance to finish your testimony from last time. I know you had made sort of a proposal to us, or some thoughts, and I believe that is back on the website. Is it? It should be back on our website. I'm getting there myself under Mark Anderson's name. So is that what you understood we were going to do today, Sheriff? That we would go back and go through your proposed testimony and your testimony?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay, awesome. And was Sheriff Marcoux going to join or not?
It was my understanding that he was going to be there in person. So the fact that he was not there, I suspect he's been caught up.
He's delayed. Yeah, he was here earlier, but okay.
That's dangerous going to the cafeteria.
You're solo then, so we're not going to wait for him. We're going to just let you go ahead with your testimony, and we'll catch him up later.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Mark Anderson, Windham County Sheriff. I am president of the Vermont Sheriff's Association. We provided, as the chair's reference, we provide written testimony. And what I'd like to do, or the way I'd like to explain this testimony, ultimately, we found, I don't know, 5 destinations, maybe 7, I don't know, but 5 destinations, just for the sake of conversation, in which we think that this car can go. It might go to more than 1 destination. It might go to 2 or 3. It might go to 5. I don't know where it's to go, but we provide these as possible solutions for what we perceive the problems S17 is trying to solve. We established 3 problem statements. First off, being a community doesn't feel safe when a person in an elected position, such as a sheriff, has committed a crime against the victim or their department. Statutory construct of sheriffs fall within governance and funding that is incredibly complex, leading to frustration when services are needed and aren't available. And then the system which the legislature's intended sheriffs to be compensated is outdated. I provide a lot of information about the history of sheriffs, the construct of sheriffs, how funding works. There's a Supreme Court decision with regards to what counties can and cannot pay for. There's realities of conflicts in statutory language that we identify.
Hold on just a second. Oh, I'm sorry, Sheriff. Are you comfortable with this behind you, Senator? I know you're with the camera behind you.
Well, it's not just a camera, it's Calvin.
It's camera and Calvin. Yeah, I just don't.
View of the witness.
Here, let's move some of these things to make it
Zoom
easier.
at the moment, so I just
Yeah.
okay.
Other than having
Don't let me okay. All right, sorry about that. Go ahead, Sheriff.
No problem. I don't remember where I left off, so if I repeat myself, I'm sorry. We reference much of the things that are, the things that seem to be, but actually aren't. And we also identify ways in which sheriff's offices are uniquely treated in comparison to any other form of state government or municipal government. And it often leaves issues to be solved either through creativity, Vermont ingenuity, or in some cases, malfeasance. So I won't read all the testimony because I know that I know that you have it, and quite frankly, if you feel it's relevant, then it is available. What I'm going to focus on is really just the solutions we get to, because we believe that these are the portions where, if we understand where the committee wants to take this bill, we might be able to provide meaningful insight to develop meaningful reforms. We do mention improving the impeachment process. There's I mean, this has been the 250-year can kicked down the road. And when we talk about how that is a time-consuming and costly endeavor, sometimes we have to also ask the question of, is the process failed? Should we be able to provide a better, should we, the state of Vermont, be able to have a better impeachment process that allows for timely removal when appropriate? We recommend creating a deputy director who would be within the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs. You have heard Executive Director John Campbell come before the committee to talk about how they effectively serve as a pass-through or process organization. What we would be looking for this person to do is be the one to start developing model policies, maintain a sheriff's code of ethics, and oversee a sheriff's oversight commission. The Sheriff's Oversight Commission, which I'll leave to Sheriff Marcoux to speak on more specifically, but broadly, we're required already under statute to have a body which hears our internal investigation complaints. We would be modeling this off of the State Police Advisory Commission in a similar format to help not only support the sheriff's offices when they are dealing with internal investigations of their employees, but also have the system which is overseen by this deputy director who is able to run the same process on a sheriff if they are to step out of the lines of the road, if you will. We provide some language which, just as a concept of thought, not necessarily a recommendation because we're not attorneys, but basically that provides a construct of when a sheriff could be suspended. That wouldn't be removal from office, but it would be a suspension of the sheriff's functions. This is already based on existing statutes. And then we also discuss a construct of limiting or removing a sheriff's pay based on certain conditions being satisfied, such as being imprisoned or under charge. This would be an analog to a suspension without pay that we would see in municipal or state agencies. I guess, Madam Chair, do you want me to continue through my whole testimony or pause for discussion on those pieces?
Does anyone have any questions or comments for Sheriff Anderson?
I'm not looking at them, so I'm looking forward to looking at them in a minute, but I can't do both.
Okay.
So I've just asked for a copy to be printed.
Why don't you continue? And yeah.
Go for it.
Great. So with regards to, I know that the committee's heard testimony such as frustration from the judiciary. That is a two-way street at times. It's not necessarily because of a dislike or disagreement, but rather there are various hurdles and bureaucracies in place that can upset what we consider to be stable, flowing government. One of the things that we encourage is to clarify what the responsibilities of the sheriff is and place those budgetary responsibilities within the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs. An example I'll use of that right now is that while sheriffs broadly provide court security for the judiciary, that budget line item is not ours. So we have to tell the judiciary what we need, who then comes and represents to the legislature what we need, which we've found we're not always in agreement. So our cost of services have increased, but they're not necessarily defended, nor does the judiciary necessarily have the knowledge to be able to defend why we're saying our cost is increasing. We've also identified needs for the Department of Children and Families, as well as the Department of Mental Health and services where sheriffs have served as Band-Aids just because no one else could provide a solution. So we encourage broad encouragement of investing in solutions, but we would also put the subject matter experts from those organizations in the front seat to determine what those are. And then
Sheriff Anderson, I want to stop you there actually. You mentioned we're aware of the issue with the judiciary, but or the courts, DCF and DMH, I know that you personally, your operation does a lot of work with them. Is that something that is standard with all sheriff's departments? Do they all do kind of work with DCF and DMH?
Last I knew, there was I believe 12 agencies who contracted with the Agency of Human Services. We contract with the agency just so that we can manage one contract across the enterprise.
Wait, the sheriff's contract have a standard contract, one contract, all the sheriffs with DCF? Is that what I heard?
Generally speaking, yes. It's with Agency of Human Services, and we're trying through the Sheriff's Association. We're trying to manage these single contracts, if you will, which makes it easier for us as sheriffs to be able to manage it. It makes it easier for the agency or agencies and departments to manage it. I will say that as we get into some of the more nuanced issues, I'll use DCF, for example. While we have a master agreement with the Agency of Human Services, my department has a separate agreement for the space that we provide, the temporary space we're providing for kids in transit that have nowhere to go except the police department conference room or the emergency room.
Do you think you could provide us a copy of that contract or a summary of what the services are that sheriffs provide?
I'd be happy to do that, Madam Chair.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, go ahead. Keep going. Because we haven't really spoken too much to the issues with DCF, Madam Chair, I know that you visited my facility, and certainly I welcome any members if they want to take the time down to see my office in Brattleboro. We'd be happy to give a tour, or I'll even offer a virtual tour because I do know it's a long drive. But that said, we're constantly in crisis when we're responding to some of these needs. And it's to the point where for me, it's Friday. Friday comes and we know that the crisis is coming, and that's just part of our normal operation. And we shouldn't be operating in crisis, but that's a normal Friday. At 4:30 or 3:30, my office will be getting a call from DCF to support a youth who has come into their custody. So investing broadly in the system, there's a variety of ways that can be done, but we do mention that to improve some of the frustrations that organizations in the state have had with sheriffs, part of it is around the investment around DCF, DMH, and the judicial functions, how sheriffs interact with that. Finally, with regards to compensation, there's a variety of ways that we can talk about this. Really, when the sheriffs come to it, we come at it looking at a concept of parity. When a sheriff is compensated less than a first-year dispatcher for the Department of Public Safety, that's frustrating. When my retirement, if I were to satisfy the retirement criteria, I would be retiring at roughly half of my peers, and that's just because of the construct of being partially compensated by the state and partially compensated by the department. And it's a strange system. It doesn't really exist anywhere else. So we provide some data with regards to how sheriffs are compensated in comparison to other public safety officials, as well as ultimately discuss ways that we could come up with a system that's better. And going back to our original problem statement around the public not feeling safe when a sheriff or another elected official has betrayed their office, if you will. Compensation theory from human resource theory and studies, compensation theory should be a motivating factor for finding good, capable candidates. And so while S17 as currently written proposes to eliminate the 5% fee, what that would effectively be doing is just reducing yet again compensation a sheriff could take, which then likely means we're not necessarily getting better candidates, we're getting worse. So we do come up with some ideas of ways that we can improve the system. Again, several destinations this car could go. We could stop at several of the destinations on the way, if you'll accept my metaphor. But not to say that all these ideas are where we think or what we think needs to happen, but we think there's several good ones here that the committee could contemplate and come up with a good solution. Great. Well, thank you, Sheriff. Anderson, are there questions for either, go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
Mark, have you and Roger's down here, have you done a total, if this patchwork, if we eliminated the patchwork on compensation, have you done a tally on what the total cost, if the state was just gonna pay you, as I wish that construct existed, do you have a tally as to what that cost would be if we paid sheriffs like we pay, or if the county paid? I mean, either way, do you have a tally on that?
I mean, it's hard to give a tally because then it would mean I'd have to come up with what the number is. So what is the number? No, I don't know. I mean, we have sheriffs who are compensated, including the 5%, which is in line with what the state police are being paid. So I think that we can make an assumption, but we also have sheriffs who said, while I would like to be compensated this year, the heating system failed, and well, I'd rather be warm when I'm in my office. So the 5% put towards that.
I mean, you know what the sheriff's cost is for Windham County. If it was a county expense, the whole shebang, as it probably should be, do you have a notion for Windham County what that cost would be?
I can say my total compensation, so that's including benefits.
The office and I would think the whole cost of the whole shebang.
I misunderstood. Sorry, Senator. I'm guessing my office is somewhere, state, county, and department funds. We are looking to the tune of about $2.5 to $3 million.
Right. And your compensation is public, right?
It is.
Okay, and so what of the 2.5 to 3 million, what is your compensation and when, if I may ask?
Yeah, last year I was paid $94,000.
And that's right. And that is where with the state police, a comparable salary at the state police.
That would be equivalent to roughly a trooper with some overtime. Generally speaking, most sergeants who supervise 2 to 3 people are paid more than we are.
Right. Thank you.
Oh, Roger, did you want to add something?
Senator, in Sheriff Anderson's testimony, that would be towards the pages aren't numbered, but it's problem statement number 3 under compensation.
Right.
And it kind of gives you an idea.
I don't have it in front of me. So.
Yeah. So it gives you an idea as
right.
where the sheriff would fall. So.
Thank you.
Are there other questions at the moment? And so Sheriff Anderson and Marcoux, there is a new draft on our website of the bill. And we're going to go over that with our counsel when he comes and talk to him about changes and additions to that. And you'll see in the last thing, the report that was in there has been modified, and the intention is to continue to modify what that report back would be in that. And at the moment, it includes compensation as one of the things to look at. So we've heard you on that one for sure. I don't think we have a solution for it now in the bill. I don't think we will even by crossover, but we certainly know that has to have a harder look.
I haven't seen a copy of the bill, but with respect to that, is the 5% still to be eliminated there?
It currently still is, yeah. And we can certainly have conversations about that. But yes, it is. Are there other questions or comments for the 2 sheriffs at the moment? Okay, Senator Watson?
Nope.
Okay, Clarkson.
Sorry, because I just don't have it in front of me, and I apologize. I just can't do lunch and my computer. Do you, Mark and Roger, do you have a recommendation? You don't have a recommendation yet as to what you like, who, if we were going to reduce the patchwork and actually have a unified compensation system for the whole department and the sheriff included, you're not recommending the county, that it be a county responsibility, or, I mean, are you not making a recommendation as to where that compensation at the moment should come up?
I can tell you where I'm thinking there. If we worked with Auditor Hopper, and there was definitely the 5% was accounted for, and it was identified as to what the sheriff would take, my suggestion still would be that a sheriff can never take more than an identified state executive level, like a major. So in effect, it would make it against the law to take more for the sheriff. Now, what the sheriff, he or she took for the department, that's fair game, because that's going to buy cars to fulfill a statutory mandate that we need. We need some cars to do that. So where that's a good deal for the state in order to use the 5% is that we are still not allowed to use the 5% to go towards retirement. So our retirement is maxed out at the statutory salary that we
Which is
pay.
very low for.
So there would be no cost to the taxpayers simply to get back to a better form of accounting of that 5%. But I would say to the committee that the 5% isn't the problem that we're seeing across the board with the sheriffs, where we are seeing problems. It's other things.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I would hope that I could get the committee to reconsider that.
Right.
Well, we're gonna keep you at the table to literally and figuratively to discuss that and other provisions, but it is still eliminated in the bill, and we'll stay there until we find solutions to all the problems. Okay, I think we're gonna move on to, would you mind, Roger, since you're down there, John Campbell's outside the door.
Okay.
Oh, no, I can.
Oh, they're just sitting on the transportation.
No, it's-
No, I don't want, could one of you, Senator White, would you
Yes.
please? Thank you.
What do you want? me to do?
No, I'm sorry, I was not being clear. Becca got it what I wanted, so.
This your place?
Yeah, I mean, that's technically the chair for the, our drafting attorney, but, so when he comes, stay there for now, when he comes in, that's. Thank you.
I'm listening, sorry.
I was like, that's my voice.
I'm gonna get Annie in here because she's the brains of the
Okay.
operation.
You're fine.
Annie? Not everyone is as fortunate in state government to have someone like Annie doing to be there. Assistant or partner in crime. Annie,
So-
why don't you sit there and I'll.
Yeah, you guys can both pull chairs. And
Time out.
if you wanna actually, could you just switch out that big chair and put it back in that corner and put it back where
This one.
there, that spot, and put the two full chairs or whatever. We just need a chair there for our drafting attorney. when he comes in. We're having problems with furniture in here.
Well, at least we don't have problems with paint.
Oh, it is over here.
And on the paintings.
There's one other,
It's so hard.
one on the left again.
You watched the YouTube video yesterday of all of us trying to move the
Oh, yeah, my brothers want to change. Good information to have. Exciting, trying to move the table.
Okay.
Edit that out. please.
Now we are organized again. So I just want to say that we changed the agenda at the last minute to add Director Campbell and Deputy Director Noonan.
Labor Relations Director.
Okay, Director and Director. To add John and Annie to the schedule, and because they had some suggestions that I think are helpful to the conversation too, and sort of are good in the mix with what the sheriff's just proposed. So that should now be on our website. Yes, if you refresh the website, their proposal or their sort of thoughts are on there. And then I invited them to come and talk through it with us as well. And if, does anyone need a hard copy
Of what?
of John and Annie's
I love
testimony?
it.
Okay. It's also on our website for people who want that. There you go. So how many of you guys take it away? Well, introduce yourself for the record and then. take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Campbell, Executive Director of the State Attorneys and Sheriffs.
Annie Newman, Director of Labor Relations and Operations for the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs.
Excellent. Go ahead.
And Madam Chair, we, you have, and the committee had requested to see if we had some ideas that we could, you or come up with to assist the committee in developing a plan ahead to deal with the sheriff's operations. And we had gone through the auditor's report and the auditor's recommendations, and what you see before you are some of the recommendations that we have come up with. As this deals a lot with the labor side of it, that's why I've asked Annie to be here as well. We'll turn it over to her so she can walk through the document.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Annie.
Thank you, committee. So what we tried to do is to listen to some of the questions the committee had asked, but also we took a look at some of the problems that had occurred out in the field with some of the sheriffs, and specifically to try to address some of those issues here. I know you have a bigger plan potentially in terms of looking at potentially constitutional amendment or other S-17, but some of this I think addresses what we saw out in the field that were problems that your constituents saw that we agreed perhaps could be put into play. So in no particular order, one of the things we looked at was the issue of moonlighting. That actually came up in a conversation with regard to the Addison County Sheriff, who may have had some other employment at the same time as he was doing sheriff work. We looked at whether or not that would be a problem, and we thought that, we would ask that be looked at by the state auditor and potentially the State Ethics Commission for any potential conflicts of interest. Whistleblower protections, last time I was here, I was mentioned that it would just be something to check with Ledge Council to make sure that the employees in the sheriff's departments are in fact statutorily protected if they bring forward complaints about issues of misconduct or malfeasance on behalf of the sheriff, or work being done by someone else on behalf of the sheriff that's inappropriate. Residency requirement, we've heard that from some of our senators who had concerns about a sheriff not regularly being available within their county. I think it's not so much the issue of when a sheriff is running for election when he was elected. I think it's after the sheriff gets elected, where are they working from on a regular basis?
Yeah, that one I will tell you is we can't require that. That we have to wait for a constitutional amendment, unfortunately.
So some of this may blend into S-17, might go over to the other.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the, as we had mentioned, there are a few things in here that probably will have the same requirement that I know that the legislature might not be able to implement themselves. However, we should keep it in mind when discussing the constitutional amendment.
Absolutely.
So in terms of the pay, one of the things that we were looking at would be a statute that currently pays the sheriffs at about $98,000 a year. And I think you've heard from both Sheriff Anderson and Mark Koo that is not equivalent in terms of their level of responsibility, supervision, and the running of an entire department for a county, that really they feel that their pay should more likely reflect the state police majors. This was just sort of reflecting some of their suggestions in regard to that. With the majors, they would be in the step system, so there would be sort of the step one through the top step, and that may be a conversation about at what step do you pay people, based on experience, and that's a bigger conversation. It may be able to be helped with by the Department of Youth Resources, and the sheriffs themselves might have some suggestions with regard to that.
And if I can add, one of the issues that there are sheriffs that we have that do far more work, probably put more time in on their offices, and whether it be outside contracts or just the carrying out of actual police law enforcement duties within their county. Whereas there are some, actually there are some that are part-time. Addison County had a part-time. I should say the sheriff was not fully certified. So the question then comes down to parity within the scope of work that they're doing.
Because I think that a level 2 certification does not allow a sheriff to do supervision over certain levels of crime in their counties. You have to be level 3, for example, to investigate major crimes and felonies, sex assaults, and things like that. So you could have a level 2 sheriff who is not able to supervise people working under them on those types of activities.
Right, and that's another consideration for
Certification.
when we want to put in when we're able to put in requirements for requiring level 3 certification.
So one of the things, another thing that came up was the issue of a merit policy and how does merit get awarded? I think criteria that I've listed here is pretty standard: excellent performance during the course of any year, work done on a special project or assignment that required additional time commitment, supervisory responsibility, additional stress for that employee, or exceptional service in the performance of the line of duty work. I think that it could be capped at a reasonable amount, either one-time bonus amount, or if they're in the step system, a number of steps per for that employee. You could also, you asked about how to put some parameters around it. You could also say how much a sheriff would be able to spend in the course of any fiscal year in terms of merit awards. Salary adjustments. So there's the issue of salary adjustments for the sheriff's staff, and that may be something you want to look at to see if there's some comparability with the state executive branch contract. So for example, the state transport deputies that are under our department this year, they received a 3% cost of living adjustment last July, and they received the $1,500 one-time lump sum bonus this January. So the question is, do you think that generally is a good measure of an annual compensation award? Do you want to suggest that the sheriffs look at what the executive branch is doing for the rest of state government? Development, we talked about the sheriff's qualification. Public records, just making sure that the sheriffs, because it's been one of the things I've noticed that when they get public records requests, some of them are very confused about what that means, and do they have to, how do they handle that? So it'd be a good idea if the sheriffs were working with the secretary developing a policy and having at least one person in their office who, when a public records request comes in, at least making sure that they're doing the proper thing, logging it, making sure that the timeframes for response are answered, and then reaching out for help if they don't know how to answer the question. But some of what they get is required to be redacted information, or perhaps potentially even been told that it's confidential, part of an ongoing criminal investigation. But they need some help with that. I think some of the newer sheriffs particularly have not had to deal with public records requests. Use of leave, I think.
Excuse me, Senator Watson has a question.
Okay, thank you. That also seems like one of the things that potentially, I wonder if we can require, before the constitutional amendment happens, but I also wonder if this, if prior to that, so this kind of training must be available. It's obviously available now. Do you know what the uptake of that kind of training is? Currently,
in terms of the sheriff specifically?
yeah.
I don't necessarily know that they're getting much assistance from that they're reaching out and that they know that the Secretary of State would be able to help. They have dedicated staff who actually go around and train state government and work with them on their policies. So I think that that's something that we could be working with the executive committee, as we've been talking about best practices. Could the executive committee make recommendations to all the sheriffs for best practices? And this might be one of those things where they do that. Similarly, to the next thing, which is in terms of the use of leave, I think a best practice might be recommended by the executive committee that the sheriffs keep accurate records about their time. I think that, a sort of a side comment on this, I think that that's important. That's important for all folks who are in state government, either as commissioners, agency secretaries, other exempts. I think it's important for accountability to the taxpayers to have a pretty accurate log of what you're doing when you're working, when you're not working. I think that that's really important. So this is, in my view, more of a best practice process. And, having been in an exempt position for over 12 years now, both 6 years as Commissioner of Labor, 6 years here in this position, I've always kept a very accurate daily work log as to when I'm working, when I'm on leave. And I think that is important, that people are able to, I'm not talking about somebody who leaves at 3:30 to go to a soccer game. I'm talking about people who are gone for a week or two on vacation, that's reflected in their work calendar, so that the public has pretty good confidence that the people that they're paying They know that they're working on a regular basis, and I think that that's just, again, a best practice.
When you're in Vermont versus Tennessee, for example.
For example.
For example,
So the 5% contractual fee, you've heard me talk about this before, that, and I think you know that I supported the sheriffs with the 5%. Basically, these are managing the contracts, they're responsible for the staffing, the performance, and all that work. So you've heard me say this before. I also think that you asked about, would there be a way to come up with policies? I think Sheriff Anderson and Sheriff Marcoux had really good ideas on some of this, and I think we agree with some of what I've written down, that maybe there would be an opportunity for the sheriff's to work on a written plan as to how that money should be used. I think we would agree it would be on things like authorizing them to use that for equipment and cars or equipment, things that they're paying for now with that, and also potentially each year for them to adjust potentially their staff salaries, because don't forget, they have the state employees who are paid through the Pay Act, but they also have their own staff, their own sheriff's, I say per diem, we're not necessarily per diem staff, but their own sheriff's office staff, and they have to be able to pay those folks too. And that money is generally being done through the sheriff's operations contracts.
and Madam Chair, if I could, and I know I've said this before, but if I could just reiterate the 5%, we have no control over from our office. The Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs have no control or say as to the 5%. Our recommendations here are to the committee if in deciding, because I know that the committee is moving forward on possible removal of that ability for sheriffs to obtain the 5%. And my only concern, I think our concern, is more as citizens of the state rather than in our positions in the office, is that if the impetus, if the sheriffs are not able to buy the cars or purchase the equipment needed to help other communities to do policing, community policing, or to help AHS with some of the issues that Mark Anderson, I know, raised about some of our younger folks that are having crisis and dealing with those matters. So I know, and I believe, based on what we all have seen, the newspaper and the news, and our personal knowledge of some of the actions that some sheriffs have done, that there is concern, and rightfully so. And I just would hate to see us make a move that just in order to say, okay, we're going to address this problem, but not realizing that there's some potentially unintended consequences. So if there's a way to use that, put guardrails on something that will not allow the system to be abused, I think I would hope that this committee and the body would consider doing that.
Mm-hmm. So
direct it more.
Yes.
What is there a policy manual right now that sheriff's departments use? Does your office have a policy manual or policies just in general that sheriffs are required to use?
There's a few things. There's the auditor's office. I mentioned this last time.
Yeah.
The auditor's office has the county manual, which is really excellent.
Okay.
And most of the sheriffs, yes, do have policies, some of which are required by the council, the Justice Council, which the sheriffs adopted over the years through their own work with some of their own legal counsel. So yeah, I think that if you were to ask Sheriff Anderson and Sheriff Marcoux, who are here today, I think, and Sheriff Norris too, I think you'd find that many of the sheriffs have extensive policies in regard to a lot of matters in the office. I just want to mention one other unintended consequence. I know John talked about it, 5%, is to mention that the transport program, the unintended consequence of taking away 5%, those cars that the sheriffs use for the state transport program, moving people, from facilities to court, moving people down to, as a judge orders people to the retreat or to the state hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Those cars are not provided to the sheriffs by the state, and there's no other than just mileage on a round trip. Those cars are paid for by the sheriff, and so that's an unintended consequence. We'd have to think about how do you come up with 25 more cars to support the state program for transport deputies.
Okay, Sheriff Anderson, are you there? Okay, no, Sheriff Marcoux. Oh, he's there. So can you talk to me about your policy manual? What do you have for a policy manual? Besides the auditor and the VCJC policies?
I have an extensive manual, and I will say that through the Sheriff's Association, I mean, we are constantly circulating updated policies, best practice policies. I mean, there's quite a bit there, and I just got to see Sheriff Marcoux's most recent policy on his bonus policy that was recently circulated based on one of the issues. So these are constantly under review. Most agencies will have up-to-date policies because their insurance carriers are going to require them to have up-to-date policies, or they won't want to insure them.
So is there a standard policy manual that you all use, or do you all have sort of varying variations?
They are all varying, and part of the reason for that is because if I were to, if the Windham County Sheriff were to create a model policy manual and deliver it to the Lamoille County Sheriff, number one, I could potentially face the liability of that. And number two, my attorney won't necessarily maintain the same attorney-client privilege that they would in advising me on creating a policy to Sheriff Marcoux or another sheriff.
What do you mean by that? Policies are public policies. You're a public official.
They are, and so if I tell another sheriff they need to have this because of some professional reason, let's say that an incident occurs that is outside of the scope of the belief of what the policy was looking to do, but ultimately exposes liability to that sheriff, I could potentially be named in a lawsuit. So we share them through public record rather than sharing them as a demand that you follow a policy. But again, these are to limit liability to the sheriff, and they'll have to. This is one of the issues that we're currently facing. I have to go have the same policy reviewed by my attorney that Roger will have to have reviewed by his attorney. So if we could have a statewide model policy, which again, if we had the deputy director for sheriffs, this could be a person who could help facilitate crafting the manual.
It's kind of crazy that you're not allowed to share policies and that you don't have a statewide policy manual. Roger, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, we share.
Sorry, Roger's talking at the moment. Mark, sorry. Go ahead.
Our policy is on Facebook, and it's public facing, and we've actually, with the new sheriffs coming in that were recently reelected, we've made that policy available to them. What makes us different than the state is that we each have different attorneys. So we are not, and I would like this to change, but we are not represented by the Attorney General if somebody sues us. So we have to get our own counsel, or insurance has to get their own counsel. That's what makes us a bit different. But that policy, those policies are going back and forth in the airwaves there for people to use best practices. And I'm happy to share our policy with the committee. I'm not sure, it's two big binders. I'm not up
Probably
to.
don't want the whole binders, but it is interesting. Okay, thank you. That's helpful, you guys. So is there, back to you, is there a possibility of the state helping, of your office helping with standardizing policies, or is that because of the legal issues that were just identified?
We could try, but again, we're kind of limited. I hate to keep on saying this because it sounds like we're just like kicking a can or saying, not my job.
That's okay.
And that's not what we're trying to do. But the authority that our office has over what the sheriff does outside of the transport program is limited.
Yeah, okay.
Non-existent.
But if we were able to provide to the sheriffs like a director of operations, sort of have that line of work assistance to the sheriffs.
Yeah.
They would have somebody who could be able to do that. I think that makes really good sense. Because I think that person would be in a position and hopefully a skill set to be able to work with the sheriffs as a group. And I think I think the sheriffs would appreciate that.
So I just will tell the committee that, Mark had to leave. Okay, thank you. That John and Annie and I talked about the possible, some little bits of restructuring with the department. So why don't you guys walk through that?
So I think one of the things the committee might be interested in would there be a way to set up the sheriffs to have like the state's attorney division and the sheriff's division? You know, how could we do that in a way that doesn't cost more money? And I think, and leave the state's attorneys over here because we're not dealing with that issue right now. I think that structure is pretty solid right now, but the sheriffs need help. So we were looking at, if you did that, you know, we have some positions that are available to us. And when the legislature last year passed the bill to allow the transport deputies to unionize, one of the things that I had requested at the board was that one of the positions would be held out for to work at central office to assist the sheriffs, and not bargain unit position, but a separate position. That position, I think right now it's budgeted. It could be used for director of operations. So the position exists. You don't need a new position number. The money exists because it's in the budget right now. We could do that. We'd have to look at that. You probably would want to look at making sure that they have the fiscal help that they need. Right now, our department does that. We wouldn't necessarily feel that we'd have to offload that, but we'd be able to look at that for another position, a fiscal, potentially maybe a fiscal and administrative role. I think we would also be able to work with the Department of Human Resources to make sure that the HR stuff and the personnel actions that need to get done, that we are able to get support from them. I think they give us good support now, but we could talk about how we would divide up some of that. And then putting together, it wouldn't be necessarily a big structure. I don't think you have to create like a bunch of positions, but maybe a few. This operations director, a fiscal administrative type of position to assist them with that. And that would help them with those fiscal policies, making sure that they're all in compliance. I really think that there's an opportunity to do that without necessarily coming back here and saying, you know, we don't have enough money. I think it's in the budget. We just have to spend the budget a little bit differently. And with some authority, I think we could do that. Now, the thing that would have to happen on that director of operations is because a non-state employee cannot supervise a state employee, that position, the director of operations, should be a state employee because they would be able to oversee the transport programs, the state employee transport program, and potentially this administrative fiscal person, who I also think should be a state employee because of the relationship with the auditor's office, which I think is really critical. So I think we could do that under the current money that we're spending for the sheriff's department now that you give us in our budget, one of our 4 budget lines.
So thank you, Annie. So that would basically be restructuring what's already there to create a division of sheriffs and a division of state's attorneys with underneath the Department of Sheriff, state's attorneys. DSAS, that's what I've been calling you, your DSAS.
We could, I mean, we could come up with another term, but it would not be creating a new department. But and I also think it's important, especially for the public, to understand that the relationship you have the state's attorneys whose job it is to investigate and prosecute criminal actions, and then you have the sheriffs. And as we've seen, unfortunately, that the two have come together somehow. And to me, as an attorney, I feel that there's that appearance of impropriety. And I know the general public could fairly ask questions about how are you going to prosecute somebody who's in your own department? Are you really going to do that? So to the full extent, and which I can gladly say that we do. Unfortunately, we have to in 2 cases going on right now. But I think that the separation would also be offer transparency to and more confidence in it for the community to understand that we will not stand for public officials who are committing criminal acts or acts of malfeasance.
Right. So Senator White, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I really appreciate you bringing up the point of separating out the state's attorneys and the sheriffs. What I'm wondering is, I love that you're telling us you can all do this with the same amount of money.
You
And
don't believe it.
I don't believe you. And it's not that I don't believe you, it's that sometimes that comes back. I'm wondering, have you had conversations with sheriffs currently and do they have concerns that they would not get the same level of service? I mean, I know this is the very kernel of an idea, but
It is a hurdle, and while we don't think it will, because we have the position numbers and we have the current budgeting, however, that's Annie and John coming up with this idea. We meet with the sheriffs might say, well, wait a second, we need this, we need that. And or we may find out that HR, Department of Human Resources, they might say, well, we're not going to be offering these services because we still feel like that you're part of NRA election case. And that could take that, because that's overshadowing this whole matter.
Yeah, we'll still,
Just
that's okay. I had asked Annie to talk with HR and we would have them in here to testify on it to make sure they're okay with it. I think we've heard from the sheriffs that they want their own person.
yeah.
So this is an idea that John and Annie came up with that might be able to happen without spending a lot of money.
Extremely compelling.
Yeah, and there's still more work to do on it, but I think it's promising and I think we would have to, put something in the bill about it sorry, lost my train of thought with all the chaos in the background. No, you're fine. So I think our attorney is out there. And so I want to make sure he gets a chance. If you're able to stick in the room, that would be great. Oh, Senator Norris, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to bring our attorney in, that's fine, but I do have some questions.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Annie or John, are you aware of any positions within the state police, non-union positions from lieutenant up to colonel, who have limited, or do you know what their sick time and or vacation time is? I don't need that today, but if I could have that, we could send it to Olivia with the chair's permission, obviously, that would be great to know. And I have, the other question I have is, it seems as though this 5% has evolved. From my original thought process on this was that it appears to me that the concern was sheriffs receiving 5% of contractual. Do you know of any entity within the state of Vermont where we limit them by statute as to what they can charge for a contract?
I can talk about what I understand and know about the federal indirect rate.
Well, I'm like Vermont State Police, for instance. Do we limit them on what they can charge for a contract? Can they show a profit on their contract?
I can't answer that. You may know from your prior representation of VSEA, so.
So I don't know in terms of if it's not a federal contract. I do know on the federal contracts, the ability to charge the indirect cost rate, you have to file that annually to the feds and explain what it is you think they're paying for. And the feds have the right every year to say yes or no to that rate that you propose. So, but I don't know, Senator, if in terms of a private contract, if they were doing something with like a private entity in Vermont, I don't know if what they charge in terms of percentages. I can.
And there is just a little bit of change because, I mean, if it's the state police, I think the one question that would need to be asked, which I think I would know the answer, is that if the state police charge money for a contract, that would go back into the general fund or into the budget.
I'm assuming there's still a profit margin.
No, there's no profit in state government. I mean, that's
Vermont
just,
State Police will do a 40-hour contract a week with no profit.
I'm the wrong person. I apologize.
The indirect cost rate or administrative overhead rate for state or federal contracts is distributed to pay an overhead cost essentially, and the indirect cost related to the contract. It's not used to pay somebody more money and increase their salary, which is what is happening in some cases with sheriffs in that 5%, is that they're using it to increase their own
We
salary.
could get into lengthy discussion, Madam Chair, on that, however, we'll move along.
Yeah,
And I still would like to know, I haven't got the answer at the yet. I know that the Vermont sheriffs countywide pay in 15% to the state of Vermont. Who has that number statewide? How can we get that?
We do have that number and I will get
Do
you.
you have that number? I would appreciate that.
That's the 15% on the civil process
The
fees.
civil process, it comes into the state through the 14 county sheriffs.
Right.
And the last note I have is, so that Chair Hardy is aware, I have our SOPs on thumb drive, not in the standard operating procedure.
oh, okay,
So you just plug them into
The-
your
like the
computer and look
policy.
at them as you so choose to, rather than two manuals, hard copy manuals.
oh, so high tech of you, Senator.
Yeah, well, I didn't do it, but somebody else did it upon my leaving office, upon my request, okay, so
Okay, okay.
if you care to.
We'll discuss afterwards, okay. We are gonna, if you are able to stay, one of you, just in case we need you, we're gonna have our attorney come up. And sorry, Tim, we're always making you wait around.
So we'll stick around, one or two of us.
Yeah.
We're gonna flip the first one.
Okay. Thank you for
Thank you
that
both, this is
very
really
productive
helpful.
Thank you.
and,
We're happy.
response to our questions.
So I love you.
Sit down there.
You're justified.
Does anybody want hard copies of the draft?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Pass it around. Okay, so the. Thank you, Tim, for being here with us. We are gonna look at an updated version of S17, and this is just based on some of the conversations we've had. This is by no means anything final, and it does not necessarily include the things that we've just talked about, although some of the elements are in here. So what I think, oh, this is not a color copy. So there is a version on it. If you want to look on the website, it has the highlighted in yellow, the new language.
Yeah, that's possible.
But no, that's okay, Olivia. I don't think we need to
So
reprint
is
it,
it
but
underlined? So the changes are underlined?
the changes are highlighted.
You can find it somewhere, there's some highlighting, like on page 3.
Yeah, and it's on our website. Okay, and also, Tim, you can just tell us what's new. You can sort of see what's highlighted. So why don't you walk us through the draft? You can mention the old stuff that's in there, and then tell us what's new.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you very much, Chair Hardy. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Before you have updated draft is formatted as an amendment, a committee amendment. It is a strike all, which simply just replaces the old language with new, with the same language that appeared in S17, plus added language which online will appear in highlights and in print will appear faint gray, but all being sure to be explicit when we hit some of that newly added language. Overall, there are probably 4 categories of new changes that are being proposed here. The first is adoption of recommendations from the auditor's office. The second creates a requirement of sheriffs to provide deputy sheriffs for court security purposes at each courthouse within the counties, and for there to be a single statewide contract for all courthouse security between sheriff's departments and the judiciary. Third item is, this creates a requirement for sheriffs to assist in the retrieval of personal belongings from the residence of a person who has a relief from abuse order. And then part of that, A, without charging a fee to the survivor, but B, enabling the sheriff to ask another law enforcement agency to assist that person if the sheriff is unable to perform this duty at the time needed. Fourth item, modifies the report required to now address, in addition to the first 2 points of the necessary number of sheriff's departments in the states and the precise boundaries of those, Let's see, a third item regarding compensation. Fourth item, another item regarding, let's see, duties, and then also oversight as well, just broadly speaking. We'll get into the actual language of each.
Yeah.
So we get through this. Starting from the top on page 1, we have the first part of this, and I'm just going to, I can't break the habit. I'll try to say amendment versus bill. I may say bill. I mean the same thing. First part is regards unprofessional conduct of law enforcement officers, approval by the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. These suggested amendments have not been changed since the last time we looked at this. Is what appears in S17, the original bill. Skipping to the next part, at the bottom of page 2, audits. Since the reader assistant heading, the asterisks, and this has been added since the last from S17. See, it includes 2 sections, sections 2 and 3. And if the chair would like, I'd be happy to do a line by line. Would you like me to read this?
Yeah, you can. And just to note, this is the suggested language that came to us from the auditor's office after their testimony. You may recall the deputy director had suggested language. So this is exactly, as far as I understand it, what they suggested. So
Yes, it's precise.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Section 2 amends Title 24 VSA, Section 290, which is titled County Sheriff's Departments, specifically subsection D. So we kind of omit A through C. Starting at D on line 18, reads, upon the election of a sheriff-elect who is not the incumbent sheriff, an announcement that the incumbent sheriff will not seek re-election, or an announcement that the incumbent sheriff intends to resign, whichever occurs earliest, all financial disbursements from the accounts of the department, including the transfer of real or personal property or other assets of the department, shall be co-signed by the sheriff and the assistant judges. A report of all financial disbursements or transfers made pursuant to this subsection shall be forwarded by the assistant judges to the auditor of accounts within 15 days following the sheriff leaving office. So I'll pause there. We'll go to section.
Snow White?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What is the difference between on the completion of outgoing sheriff's duties versus following the sheriff leaving office? Is that just in my assumption is that that's in the case of someone who is removed from office? Is that what we're trying to resolve for here?
I can't speak to the intent of this, but I can tell you it broadens the conditions under which a sheriff leaves office to trigger these kind of other.
Okay, so it's a lower threshold.
I would say lower, just accounts for different scenarios.
Okay, more scenarios.
Section 3 amends Title 24 VSA, Section 290B, titled Audits, particularly subsection B, so let's omit A here. Starting on line 10, and this is, sorry, on page 3. Actually, I'm sure, would you like me to kind of just skip to the parts being changed, or we kind of leave some contextualizing?
Yeah, why don't you
language in there?
contextualize it? Yeah, go ahead.
Do you read it, sorry, or?
Yes, go ahead.
The auditor of accounts shall adopt and sheriffs shall comply with the uniform system of accounts, controls, and procedures for the sheriff's department, which accurately reflects the receipt and disbursement of all funds by the department, the sheriff, and all employees of the department. The uniform system shall include mission of 1 through 7, 8, procedures and controls that unify revenues received from public entities through appropriations or grants from federal, state, local governments, from revenues received through contracts with private entities. 9, which is newly entered here. Procedures to notify the auditor of accounts and Department of State's attorneys, sheriffs of the establishment and activities of any non-public organization of which the sheriff or any employee of the sheriff is the director, and which has a mission or purpose of supplementing the effects of the sheriff's department. And 10, which is the same, but it's just been renumbered, other procedures and requirements as the auditor of accounts deems necessary.
Now, this language, paragraph 9, was suggested, and the intent of this is, you may recall, one of the sheriffs, actually in my county, created this side kind of nonprofit organization, and there was a lot of, it's a little sketchy. So this is added to notify the auditor and the department if there something like this has been created. It wouldn't prevent it, which I'm not sure we can prevent it, but can we?
Yeah. Look into that.
It would be nice to know whether we can just say, no, you can't do that. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Instead of
just
if we want it, I
notification,
think we should decide.
that they can't do it. Because what they did was create a nonprofit organization that sounded like a shadow sheriff's department.
That's not kind of sketchy.
That's super sketchy. So this is what was recommended to us, but if there's a way that we can strengthen it and just say, no, you can't do this, that might be even better.
I'll look into it.
Thank you. And Senator Clarkson.
And just to go back, Senator White, to your concern on page 3, just before, there was intent, I believe the intent here is that a sheriff can't leave office and take a lot of money with them, which is, I believe, what happened in one or more sheriff's departments where they left but they emptied accounts on the way out.
Always a lovely parting gift.
Yeah, and this language was also meant that, as Tim was saying, that some sheriffs leave not because they're, completion of their duties, but because they are, they're just
Being shepherded out.
Yeah, that was more of my question. Was it in other instances outside of that side?
I believe I recall that's where that's from, but
Makes sense.
I stand.
Yeah, if we need Tim Ash to come back in and talk to us about it, we can. Okay, go ahead.
Continuing on page 4, subsection C. Let's see, on line 6 reads, the auditor of accounts and the auditor's designee may at any time examine the records, accounts, books, papers, contracts, reports, and other materials of the county sheriff's department as they pertain to the financial transactions, obligations, assets, and receipts of that department. The auditor shall charge for any associated costs in the same manner described in Title 32, Section 168, subsection B. I'll pause there. Okay, next part regards sheriff's contracts, and there is new language in here. I'll just kind of briefly go through the highlights. We kind of had introduced that we had scratched town and put in municipality. Upon further looking into it, this other collection of it, the phrase town, city, village, and county, probably more appropriate based on how we use the definitions of PSA. And you see that top of page 5 as well. The new language appears in subsection F at the bottom of page 5, breaking into page 6. On line 19, I'll read that. An agreement or contract to provide law enforcement or other related services, including security service on county property, must be a single statewide contract for such services over all county properties and be between all sheriff's departments and assistant judges. In 30 days of executing such a contract, the contract shall, 1, be posted on the website of each sheriff's department, on the website of each county courthouse, 2, be posted in 3 public places in each county by the assistant judges, and 3, be published in all daily newspapers having general circulation in each county and at the expense of the assistant judges.
So this language actually I haven't seen yet. So this is supposed to get at the statewide contract for court security.
Yes.
So I think maybe we want to be more specific that it's not any county building, it's courthouses.
Sure. I can adjust.
Well, conceivably other county, other.
Well, this is for a statewide contract for security of courthouses. there may be other things that sheriffs do with other county buildings that wouldn't necessarily be statewide. This is just specific to courthouses, I think. Or that's the intent anyway. Did you want to add something, Tim?
Yes, the kind of subdivisions 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they'd actually be appropriate in this one. It was originally conceived of, well, I can just say that the publication of this may not have to go look like this.
Yeah.
This detail.
Yeah.
This is one contract, it's just the one contract.
It doesn't
reflecting on
seem necessary to do that, and it might be confusing to people. And this is, and the thing I think that we need to get at here is this is a contract between the judiciary and the 14 sheriffs. That's one contract that they will provide court security. And, you know, I know that the sheriffs are concerned about the rate, so I think it might be fair to put something in that, you know, the judiciary and sheriffs shall negotiate a rate that covers the cost of the contract or something to that effect. I don't know if others have ideas about that, but the point is that our judiciary is having a really hard time getting court security, and our sheriffs are having a hard time getting the rate they need to be able to provide that court security. So this is supposed to meet both of those, or help solve both those problems.
I've been a note to adjust.
Okay. Senator White, did you want to? Yeah, I see.
Thank you, Chair. Oh,
Is that what you want?
Yes, I want to
Okay.
inform you.
Senator Watson, did you have a question? I just want to make sure senators get their questions answered first. Okay, so, Sheriff Marcoux, go ahead.
Just the, on F, second line where it says services including security service on county property. Just to point out that a lot of this property now is owned by the state.
That's a good point, is that some of the courthouses are state courthouses and some of them are county courthouses. So we do want to stay away from the assumption that it's county property. It's really, the intent is to cover security at our courts. That has been a huge issue, and we just need to make that. And having one statewide contract will make sure that everybody's on the same page with it.
So maybe independent of who owns the courthouse, it is to cover the courthouses. And there could be one in the county that's owned by the state and one by the.
Exactly. I think in your county, that is the case.
Correct.
And so we want it to be all courthouses that are
So not just
by the state judiciary or whatever.
So which,
So that's if they choose to enter into a contract.
No, it's a requirement.
no, we're now requiring, I think that's what this bill is intending, is that this will create a uniform contract.
I've made note of that, and I'll be communicating.
Okay,
with
sounds
you
good.
about update the language.
Thank you. And, okay, keep going.
Okay, the next part is on page 6, halfway through, regarding sheriff duties. Section 5 amends Title 24, VSA, Section 293, titled Duties. A, on line 12 reads, "The sheriff so commissioned and sworn shall serve and execute lawful writs, warrants, and processes directed to the sheriff according to the precept thereof, and do all other things pertaining to the office of sheriff." In subsection B, "The sheriff shall assist in the retrieval of personal belongings from the residence of a person who has a relief from abuse order pursuant to 15 VSA, Section 1103, Subdivision 1. A sheriff shall not seek a fee from the person being assisted in this subsection or any representative of that person." Subdivision 2. The sheriff may ask another law enforcement agency providing law enforcement services for the location of the person being assisted in this subsection to assist the person if the sheriff is unavailable to perform this duty at the time needed. Subsection C. The sheriff shall provide deputy sheriffs for court security purposes at each courthouse within the county.
Is that consistent with what we were trying to do above with the contracts? Yeah.
Wouldn't that be part of the contract?
Um,
Strikes me that would be part of the negotiation.
the subsection C
Yeah.
is really, and maybe if it needs to go under contracts and duties both, is that what you're thinking, that it needs to be both? We lay out the requirements of the contract and then we include it as the duty of the sheriff, like courthouse security, yes? So does it need to, we want to make sure that the language is consistent between those two sections, and does it need to reference each other, or does that not matter?
We could insert a cross-reference. It's, they're both statutorily close by, so, but we certainly can.
Okay. I leave that one to you, but I just want to make sure that that's clear, that if somebody's looking at them separately. And then in terms of this, and I want to ask the committee, the conversation with this is, remember, we got some testimony from the network against sexual and domestic violence, and this has been, and you'll recall the issue, but paragraph 2 at the bottom of the page is meant to be in the case of, for example, if a town has a municipal police department, the sheriffs could say to the municipal police department, this is your territory, you handle this one for this person. But other than that, the sheriff is responsible for doing it in the rest of the county. So in my county, Middlebury Police would take care of these for Middlebury, but maybe in New Haven, the sheriff would. That's
It's a delegation of authority.
yeah, but so that there's not a place where somebody's gonna fall through the cracks or that they're gonna be charged for it, but that the sheriffs aren't responsible for places that there's a municipal police force. That makes sense. Does this language you can capture? And I see that you want to say something, Roger, so I'll let you, but just a minute.
Oh, I was just listening.
Oh, okay. What do you think of the language here, you guys? You think it's okay?
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that number 2 doesn't actually
Say what you want.
say what we want. Do you have an idea, Becca?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is, I'm very happy to see this section. That was my big concern coming out of the network's testimony. And my question to Ledge Council would be, so it says, so I think that's exactly what we're trying to solve, is this gap of where a sheriff's authority or a sheriff says, hey, I would love to offer this service. I obviously want to do right by domestic violence survivors, but it costs me money to do this. In that instance, we have a may ask another law enforcement. So should it be a shall ask in like the situation in which they are unable, or unable is the wrong word, but they're not finding, yeah, where it's appropriate for them. Because this makes me think they may ask another law enforcement agency, but if for some reason that doesn't happen, it's not really on them to find an alternative arrangement.
Right. As written, it is conditional language, but actually hinges on whether the sheriff is unavailable at that time. Versus if, sounds like what it probably should say is that if there is an alternative law enforcement agency.
With jurisdiction or something.
Yeah. They may delegate authority if there is an appropriate law enforcement entity in place. I mean, that's I think all we're trying to say.
So perhaps ending the sentence at that if on the top of line 7, then that would be tapping into the alternative, another law enforcement agency providing law enforcement services for the location of the person being assisted.
No.
And then that may, it's written, B establishes an affirmative duty, and then subdivision 2 provides them with the ability to optionally inquire
Yeah.
if another
So,
law enforcement agency could perform this task instead of them fulfilling the duty they're required to do.
yeah,
We can change that.
yeah, let's work on the language together. Roger, did you have a suggestion?
Yes. I work a lot with Carolyn Hanson and everything, and I certainly understand, empathize with the issue. This really is a responsibility of every police department, state police, every, with primary responsibility in that particular town.
Oh, that's a good,
Primary law enforcement.
primary, that's the phrase that I was looking
Primary
for.
law enforcement responsibility. So we, under this, we may ask or shall ask a town, but that town doesn't have to say, no, we're gonna do it. There's a lot of passing the buck here that's happening on this.
Okay, so maybe it's something we include under sheriff's duties, that they have to do it where they are primarily responsibility, but maybe it's a broader thing that we have to require all law enforcement to do without charging fees, so that, are you following me? So that there's some other place in the statute that we also have to say municipal police have to do this and state police have to do this. And the point is that somebody has to do it and none of them can charge the victim.
Yes, yes.
Right, and they need to do it if in the area the victim lives, I mean, so wherever they have jurisdiction.
Right,
They have
and
to
maybe
serve
it's the phrase that Roger used, the primary law enforcement responsibility. So
For that area.
is this making sense to you, Tim?
Sure, so I guess a question, Chair, is in the priority of response, whose duty is it for me to show up first? It sounds like the primary being the local, or is the local law enforcement. And then if they're not available, sheriff,
Right.
then, but perhaps this is best left.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we don't want to have happen is a victim have nobody be able to help them. And that, or to be charged after they've been the victim of domestic violence, to be charged to go get their, belongings. So however, we need to make that happen, and there needs to be somebody who's the bottom line responsible for it, that, yeah, so maybe we need to keep thinking about this, but I think the primary law enforcement duty, the primary law enforcement agency is what you said. Is that right, Roger?
The primary law enforcement agency with responsibility for that jurisdiction.
Okay.
So the responsibility for that, too. But
So you got that phrase, and we'll work on that.
But I can see why the if is important, because we have some very tiny law enforcement departments. I can see that they might be engaged in an emergency elsewhere where one of these things had to be served ASAP. Some of these are very time sensitive. And where there needs to be a fallback. So I think the if piece is very important to have for the fallback,
Yeah, well, who's the fallback?
the sheriffs.
Okay, and the sheriffs are the fallback.
I think the sheriffs have to be the fallback.
Okay.
I mean, otherwise it's
The
state
state
police,
police.
but I think the county sheriff is the fallback. What do you think, Roger? In case the local, like South Royalton has one or two police people. I mean, if they're engaged in an emergency, the fallback has to be.
Orange County has about 3 people right now. Really, what we need to look at, if you're the primary law enforcement agency, that's just part of what you have to do
Yeah.
as soon as you can do it.
Okay.
Because if you say that the sheriff's department, I don't know what the sheriff's departments are gonna look like, particularly, there may be a change to the contract stuff with a 5%. So the important thing, I think, is to, all right, if you're the police department for this area, this is part of what you
This is
have to
your
do.
job.
Yeah. And so Tim, okay, well, let's work on this line. You heard the conversation, so you can noodle it. And then, wait, are we at the last part? Is there another section that got changed?
Yes, and just quickly, section 6, dealing with duties as police officer has not been modified. Section 7 has, pertaining to the repeal of the penalty for refusal to assist the sheriff, has also not been modified. It's just still being repealed in full. Section 8 is being modified, and this regards the report. It now reads, starting at the bottom of 7, breaking to 8, starting in 19. On or before January 1st, 2024, the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs, in consultation with the Vermont Sheriff's Association, shall report to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs and the Senate Committee on Government Operations with findings and any recommendations for legislative action on 1, the necessary number of sheriff's departments in the state. 2, the precise boundaries of any proposed district in which a sheriff's department is to be established. 3, the compensation of sheriffs, deputies, and departmental staff, including salaries, overtime, and bonuses. 4, the deputies of sheriffs as related to both Number 4, the duties of sheriffs as related to both law enforcement and administration of sheriff's departments. And 5, oversight of sheriffs as related to both conduct and administration of sheriff's departments. And then that leads us to the effective date, section 9, taking place upon passage, which has not changed.
So for this section, this was an attempt to get at some of the issues that we want a report back on. The salary issues we're not going to solve right now. And frankly, we're not giving sheriffs a pay raise in this bill. That is not what the intent of this bill is. But I think that they have brought up some, things that are worth considering. And I think it needs more conversation about the structure of how they're paid and how their funding works. So having this report and having the department and the Sheriff's Association work together on sort of coming up with some recommendations would be helpful. So this is the part of the bill that I think we should really, if everyone could sort of think of what we want to include here, what we want them to report back on, who they should consult with. Right now it's the department and the association. There may, did you put, there may be some things that we should ask them to consult with the Criminal Justice Council. There may be some things to consult with the Ethics Commission on. There may be some things to consult with the auditor on. There may be other places for them to consult on with. So we need to take a break, frankly. I need to take a break, so we're gonna take a break. So we can all think about this, and that includes John and Annie and Roger and Mark and others, thinking about what we want the report back on and how we can tie it to some sort of requirements for the sheriffs. And so think about that too, in relation to that 5% and relation to what we want to require in statute and what we're able legally to require in statute. So to be continued on this one, but we do need to get this bill out soon. We're basically down to 2 more weeks before crossover. So we're going to be working fast. So give me your best ideas as soon as possible. All right. Thank you, Tim.